Hey, I think we're alive. Happy President's Day. I'm here with Angela, our communications manager today, and I'm super excited because we're going to dive into Black History today. This month is Black History Month, so we're going to dive into some history from that. But before we get started, I am going to share my screen here. Oops, that didn't work. No. I will. Let's go ahead and get started. Angela, while I try to pull this up because it is not pulling up right now. So this is Black History Month, and we've got some exciting things to talk about. So I wonder, we've got a little known fact about Black History Month that kind of overlaps with our mission here at the Turning Point. And it has to do with civil rights icon Rosa Parks. So I wonder if you could just start by telling me a little bit about maybe what you know about Rosa Parks or what you grew up hearing and maybe how that's changed as time has gone on, and especially as you began to work here at the Turning Point.
Yeah, so I know that a lot of times, like when we think of Rosa Parks, the first thing that kind of comes to our mind is, her being on the bus, not giving up her seat. And history books and, online has always painted her as, this old lady, and she was, tired and didn't want to give up her seat. And, when you think about it, she really wasn't an old lady. At that time of that bus incident, she was only 42 years old. And
I read that and I was like, I'm 42 years old. Like, that was just a really shocking moment when I found that out.
Yeah, and so when you see her in photos and even in old videos, she always seemed like she was so quiet and, to herself, but she was, very much into advocacy work. And so a lot of times when we think about her, she became this iconic civil rights movement leader with the whole bus incident in Montgomery, Alabama. But even before then, she was an advocate for civil rights. And so a lot of the work that she was doing at the time, she was working with the NAACP. Did not know that, but she also pioneered a lot of crusades, and she was very much into advocacy against sexual assault, particularly against Black women. And so that all kind of stemmed from her own experience with sexual violence. In 1931, a white neighbor of hers attempted to rape her. And so that is where it kind of led into her whole advocacy work and speaking out against sexual violence, particularly in the Black community against Black women. But an interesting story that I found out about her, it kind of stems from Recy Taylor. Have you ever heard of Recy Taylor before?
So before this, I will say my knowledge of Rosa Parks was she was a seamstress. She was tired coming home from work and refused to get up and move. And really, up until maybe 5 years ago, that is the whole picture. I didn't even realize that there was more beyond that. She was involved in the civil rights movement. So I, up until like a few months ago, I had never heard.
Yeah, so just learning a little bit more about her and digging into her story, it kind of stems into Recy Taylor, who was an African-American woman. And in about, I think it was 1944, she was walking home from church with one of her friends and her friend's son, and there were 6 white men who approached them. And they tried to get her to come with them in the car. She tried to escape, but eventually they kind of took her away at gunpoint. They took her down the street, and each one of those 6 men took turns raping her. and they put her out on the street. And so they threatened her, you know, if you tell, if you report, you know, we'll kill you, we'll kill your family. And so she didn't keep quiet. So just think about the bravery in that and speaking out against, you know, 6 white men. She told her father, who then took her to the sheriff. So the sheriff then kind of, you know, did some investigating. He found 2 of the young men, and they actually admitted that they were with her that night. And, you know, she's telling the truth, but nothing happened. So that was just kind of the end of it. The news kind of reached the NAACP office in Montgomery. And so this is kind of where Rosa Parks come into this story. She was working with the NAACP as a secretary, but she was also an investigator. So they sent an investigator to investigate this Recy Taylor story. And the investigator that they sent was Rosa Parks. So even before, you know, her iconic movement with the civil rights, she was still, you know, an advocate, and she was, you know, standing up for rights, particularly in this case against sexual violence. And so when Rosa Parks arrived to town, she met with Recy. She met with Recy's family, and, you know, she started, you know, doing her investigation. Well, the sheriff told her he didn't want her in town. He called her a troublemaker, asked her to leave, but she did leave respectfully, but the work didn't stop there. She took that advocacy work back to Montgomery with her. She organized a committee for equal justice for rights of Recy Taylor, and that committee made sure that Recy's case became headline news. And so from there, you know, the grand jury refused to indict any of the men. No charges were brought against the men, even after them admitting it. And so Rosa wrote letters to the governor of Alabama, you know, asking him, hey, don't fail the people in your state. We want to make sure that rights are for everyone. And it's just amazing just to find out that she was not an old tired lady. She was very much involved in civil rights before the bus incident. Moving forward from that, you know, Recy Taylor case became, you know, widely known, but none of the men ever received any charges for that. Even after then, Rosa Parks still kind of, you know, kept in her advocacy, and she spoke out against sexual violence against women, particularly, you know, Black women. And she also stood up for the injustice of having Black men taking a lot of the charges for the sexual violence cases that were happening when they were innocent. In terms of Recy Taylor, I would say probably about 2010, there's an author named is Danielle McGuire. She, just like us, heard about, you know, all of this work that Rosa Parks, you know, did in this advocacy. She heard about Recy Taylor. She wrote this book called At the Dark End of the Street. That book became published nearly 70 years later from the Recy Taylor case. It kind of resurfaced that story, and the Alabama House of Representatives actually wrote a letter to Recy Taylor and apologized for the state's failure to prosecute.
That's amazing. So was Recy still alive at that point?
She was still alive at that point. She actually was alive. So the letter was written in like 2011 when that book was published, and, you know, the talks became about public knowledge, you know, then, you know, it's back in the news. And so that's when the House of Representatives in the state of Alabama wrote that apology letter to Recy and say, hey, you know, we apologize. We heard about what happened to you. We're sorry that what happened to you. You know, please accept this as our apology for not prosecuting. So Recy Taylor was alive. She actually passed away in December of 2017. She was 97 years old.
Wow. So it's crazy to me because we think about history, right? All of this stuff happened so long ago, and yet it really didn't.
It didn't.
Then a lot of these icons, these figures, these people who created this movement are still, now I think quite a few have passed away, especially in the past maybe 5-10 years, but still alive. And the work, and I think that's one of the things too, is that our history kind of is like, it happened and then it stopped. But the same with Rosa Parks, right? She didn't stop after the Montgomery bus boycott.
No, she didn't. She worked all the way up until, she actually passed away. And so she was still fighting for rights, even then, and even when she was actually an old woman, as they kind of portrayed her as being at 42 years old, she was not an old lady. She was not tired. She was very much active in civil rights before the bus boycott. And just to think Recy Taylor was still alive just in 2017, that's like, is not too far from where we are now in 2023. So you think about this as being history, but these pioneers and these people who spoke out against sexual advocacy made the way for us to be able to do the work that we do today.
Yeah. I think that's something that we have to keep in mind every time we do our work, is we're building on the shoulders of the people who came before us. And the thing about Rosa Parks that also kind of catches my attention is that she was an advocate for civil rights, but also for women's rights. And you can't separate the two when it comes to the cases that she worked on in her own experience, because she was a Black woman in the South, experienced violence, and it was all intertwined. And in cases now, I mean, we still see that. And
that is true. That's true. I think about, some more inspiring figures when it comes to terms of like thinking about speaking out against sexual violence. Ida B. Wells, she was an activist. I'm not sure if you heard about her. She's an activist and a journalist. But she also spoke out against sexual violence that African American women faced in the South. She actually founded the National Association for Colored Women, and she was also one of the founders of the NAACP, which is the organization that Rosa Parks was investigating for. So there's so many inspiring figures, you think about in Black history, of women who were speaking out against sexual violence.
So when I think of Black History Month, one of the things that I have been more exposed to, I guess, as I've been older and I've been a parent, is just some of the more inspiring figures that maybe were not specifically related to the civil rights or specifically related to the turn of the century, those kind of history things. And so I always think of Maya Angelou, because when I was growing up, she was just this huge, powerful figure, poet. And I think, her background, I'm trying to remember, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. It also includes like elements of, of sexual violence, but she is just such a tremendous and inspiring figure for me. And some of the poets that kind of capture that way of acknowledging like the challenges that are around, but manage to supersede it, and their influence carries on so far into the future.
That is true. That is so true.
So as we're wrapping up, are there any current Black voices that you listen to or that really inspire you right now, or that you follow, whether either on social media or at an organizational level?
So I think about, in terms of like advocates right now, like we talked a lot about Rosa Parks and Ida B. Wells and, those figures. But, thinking about right now, currently in 2023, I mean, I think about our current board member, Lavinia Masters, who, is always sharing her story about, her experience with sexual violence in her case. And she's become very, inspiring to other people and other women, particularly in the Black community, who has inspired them to come forward and share their story. She's very active, on social media, and she provides that safe space for other women who, look up to her and say, if she can, share her experience, so can I. And also I follow Tarana Burke. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. She actually founded the Me Too movement. And so that became very popular, where she gave a safe space to women, particularly women of color, to be able to feel supported when they're speaking out against their sexual violence and sexual harassment that they have experienced. So thinking of terms of people and advocates and women, particularly Black women who are advocates right now, those are two that came to mind for me.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned Lavinia Masters, because I have had an opportunity the past, I don't know, month to hear her several times just to speak so beautifully about what she's overcome as a survivor, but then to see her in her advocacy with the state of Texas and the backlog of rape kits, getting those processed, and then with the new legislation that was passed with the Lavinia Masters Act. It's just, you see something that is inspiring in the past, but then when you can see it in the present too, it gives you hope and energy for moving forward.
Right, exactly. So you think about, this is a fight that's been, started way back, and I'm sure it was before even Rosa Parks. But we're still carrying that fight. So you think about, in terms of advocacy, you have all these inspiring women, in our past, but also in our current, who are being very vocal about, survivor rights and things that they've experienced. They can bring it to a personal level to kind of inspire other survivors who may not be quite ready to speak about it, but they can draw strength from their stories as well.
Yeah. Well, so what I'll do is I'll throw some of these links in the comment box underneath the Facebook Live. And then when we upload this video on YouTube, we'll also make sure, since you do that, we'll also make sure and have the links here. But I think this is a great time because there are so many opportunities to delve in and get some of these stories and expand the narrative of the inspiring heroes and see what people are doing now. But one thing I was going to mention, that in terms of Black History Month, as parents, there are so many resources, like for children, for young people, for teens, like young people's versions of history. So the Rosa Parks, the documentary that came out, The Rebellious Life of Rosa Parks, I think it's on Peacock now. It was Soledad O'Brien. They also have a young people's version of the book that inspired that documentary. So there's options for that, and Ida B. Wells. There's just so many resources that you can see and look at, biographies. And then the other thing that I would mention is that I love podcasts because they allow you to kind of go deeper. So you don't just hit kind of the headline, but you can actually dig deeper. So I've got a resource for that just includes some civil rights. And I just listened to one about Josephine Baker and World War II. And so I'll post, I think it's called Now's Where It Gets Interesting, but it's a historical podcast, but it really, you hear a lot of these kind of quiet stories of women. So we'll make sure and get that posted. But wrapping up, so next week you'll join us again because we've got some exciting news coming.
Yes, can't wait to share all of our upcoming exciting events that we were planning for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So look forward to meeting you back here, same place, same time next week.
Great. And as we're signing off, I am going to see if I can't get my PowerPoint back up just so that it doesn't look like it's going to. It's dead on me. So but we'll make sure and we'll post everything in the comments and on YouTube, and we'll see you again next week here. Thanks, Angela.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.